Well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar on the emergence of carbon capture and storage in Malaysia and Indonesia. This is the second instalment of a three-part series where we'll be discussing emerging CCS markets from around the world. In today's webinar, we'll assess the various mechanisms, policies, and players that are driving CCS adoption in the Southeast Asian region, specifically Malaysia and in Indonesia. My name's Alex Zapantis, and I'm the General Manager of Commercial at the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. I'll be moderating the discussions today. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, the Global CCS Institute is an international think tank whose mission is to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture and storage, which is a vital technology to tackle climate change and deliver climate neutrality. Next slide, please. So today's session will include a brief audience question and answer session. You can submit your questions using the Q&A function, which you'll find on the Zoom control panel, as you can see at the bottom of your screen. And in the coming days, a recording of this webinar will be made available on the Institute's website, so you can watch it at any time at your leisure. Next slide, please. So why Malaysia and why Indonesia? Well, with Malaysia and Indonesia announcing that carbon capture and storage will play a role in decarbonising their respective industrial sectors, the two are the first countries to enter the CCS market in Southeast Asia. While still in the early stages, CCS progress has seen support from both public entities and the private sector alike in these two countries. In Malaysia, government-owned enterprises like Petronas are championing CCS in an effort to decarbonise the natural gas sector. At present, there is one commercial CCS project in the works and two potential offshore hubs that could possibly support carbon dioxide storage from neighbouring countries. Malaysia is also looking to further enhance its CCS efforts through supportive measures and CCS-specific regulatory frameworks. Similarly, in Indonesia, the emissions mitigation potential is being acknowledged and steadily adopted by industry. Notably, BP is turning to carbon capture and storage to decarbonise its liquefied natural gas operations in West Papua province, and Repsol is adopting CCS in an effort to mitigate over 2 million tonnes of carbon dioxide from their operations in Sakakemang in South Sumantra. Next slide, please. So to speak more about that, we're joined by some excellent speakers who have really good, deep experience and expertise in this space. We're very lucky to be joined by Damien Johnston, who's a Vice President of Gas and Low Carbon Energy Growth, Asia Pacific with BP, with Yati Mohamad, who is the General Manager of Resource Development and Management with Petronas, Dr. Rahmat Sule, who is a Senior Lecturer with the Bandung Institute of Technology, and our own Noura Al-Amer, who is a Senior International Climate Change Policy Advisor here at the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. And I'd like to thank all of our speakers for agreeing to share their time and knowledge and wisdom with us today. So with that, let's begin with a few remarks from our speakers. And our first speaker, as I just said, is Damien Johnston, VP Gas and Low Carbon Energy Growth Asia Pacific with BP. So over to you, Damien.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you to the Global CCS Institute for the invitation to BP to be present today. I look forward to the discussion that's going to follow. Back in 2020, BP announced that it was going to reinvent itself. And with that came a statement of our ambition to be a net zero company by 2050 or sooner, and to help the world to get to net zero. From a strategic perspective, what that meant was we were embarking on a transformation from an international oil company to an integrated energy company, delivering solutions for customers. These solutions could be grouped into three categories. The first, low carbon electricity and energy. The second is around convenience and mobility. And the third is around resilient and focused hydrocarbons. And this is where CCS has an important role to play. BP has a long history of working closely with the government of Indonesia through our investment and operation of the Tangguh facility. Tangguh's current 2 LNG trains with a capacity of 7.6 million tonnes per annum located in West Papua have been in operation since 2009, and during that time they've successfully delivered in excess of 1,250 LNG cargoes. We're currently in the process of constructing the third LNG train at Tangguh, which will add a further 3.8 million tonnes of capacity. BP and the Tangguh partners collectively have invested approximately $10 billion for Tangguh to date, and there's an additional $3 to $4 billion of investment required to develop remaining discovered resources, as well as reducing carbon emissions from existing operations through the Tangguh EGR and CCUS project. Tangguh EGR CCUS is, we're proud to say, is the first CCUS project that has received POD approval in Indonesia from Sakakemang, which occurred back in August 2021. The project aims to inject and store approximately 33 million tonnes of CO2 over the life of the project to our Vuwata reservoir, and it will also add approximately 500 BCF of gas recovery. The project will reduce Tangguh carbon emissions by up to 40%, capturing and storing in excess of 3 million tonnes per annum whilst at full production rates. Tangguh EGR CCUS will move into FEED in the middle of this year and is targeting final investment by the end of next year. Major construction work will start in 2024, and the plan for startup in late 26 or early 27. The Tangguh EGR CCUS aligns and supports the government of Indonesia's target for gas production of 12 BCF per day and the emissions reduction target in 2030. Tangguh Vuwata Reservoir, and this is where it gets really quite interesting, Tangguh Vuwata Reservoir has a massive storage capacity in excess of 500 million tonnes of CO2, which could provide the opportunity for storage of third-party CO2. Advanced and affordable technology for short and long-distance CO2 transport will be key for the CCS development in the region, in which some countries may not have reservoir storage, while other countries may have large capacity for injection and storage, such as Malaysia and Indonesia that we're talking about today. So what is it that BP needs to move things along? In short, it's policies and regulation. BP is deeply appreciative of the government of Indonesia's initiatives to support carbon economic value and the CCUS implementation in upstream oil and gas sector. We've seen the presidential decree number 98/2021 on carbon economic value issued last year, and have been working together with the Directorate General of Oil and Gas, Sakakemang, CCUS Centre of Excellence and other stakeholders in developing the ministerial decree on CCUS for upstream oil and gas sector. We hope the ministerial decree on CCUS for upstream oil and gas will be issued as per the current plan in the middle of this year, and other derivative regulations supporting the CCUS implementation in upstream, such as baseline determination, MRV, carbon trading, will come prior to the Tangguh CCUS final investment decision that we're targeting the end of next year. BP and partners will be available to support the government of Indonesia's partner and be the government of Indonesia's partner in developing regulations which will enable and incentivize CCUS and its carbon credit market implementation. I'll leave it there, and I do look forward to the discussion, and I'll just throw back to you now, Alex.
Well, thank you very much for those remarks, Damien, and certainly very encouraging and exciting to hear about projects advancing in the very near future in Indonesia. So congratulations to BP. Now I think I'd like to introduce our next speaker, who is Yati Mohamad, General Manager of Resource Development and Management at Petronas. So Yati?
Thank you, Alex. Very good afternoon. Selamat tengah hari from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I'm Yati. I'm from Petronas. To be specific, I'm from the Malaysia Petroleum Management, which is which plays the role of the host government, shaper, enabler, as well as facilitator for the upstream oil and gas industry in Malaysia. So, can I get the next slide, please? Okay, next. So thank you very much for the Institute to give me the opportunity to share on what's happening in terms of CCS in Malaysia. For the last few years, Petronas has been focusing a lot in terms of technical studies and technical work to mature or to evaluate the potential of CCS in Malaysia. And among the key work that has been done is in terms of high-level screening of potential CCS sites, and before we zoom in and prioritize on the ones that we felt that we need to further do technical maturation and firm up its potential. And our focus in the early years was mainly on depleted gas reservoirs, as well as a bit on depleted oil reservoirs. But now we have expanded that scope and have started studying more on the saline aquifers in Malaysia as well. And based on that study, based on that high-level study, we found that Malaysia has ample storage capacity in the likes of about 46 TCF just from depleted gas reservoirs. And that has given us a lot of positive vibes. And we have further down study in terms of and develop what we call the Malaysia Sequestration Area Development Plan. So this Sequestration Area Development Plan looks at all the high CO2 resources that we want to monetize in Malaysia, and we pair it up with potential storage sites in Malaysia. So essentially is a partnering of a source and sink in Malaysia. Yeah? And as much as possible, our strategy is in terms of having a hub that can cater for more than one CO2 source. Yeah? So we've done that for Malaysia. After our focus in the technical studies, we have further expanded that because we know in order for CCS to be successful in implementation and deployment, it needs the full ecosystem. Yeah? So we have now done a bit more work looking at the regulations, the legal framework to deploy CCS in Malaysia. We've also looked at technology that can make these CCS projects cheaper, more affordable, as well as looking at the commercial framework. As you know, in Malaysia, a lot of our projects are under the production sharing contracts. So we're looking at what are the terms that we can come up with or enhance in order to promote more efforts in terms of monetization of these high CO2 resources. Other than that, we've been doing a lot more collaboration. If you read the news at the end, starting the end of last year, there have been at least 5 or 6 MOUs that have been signed between Petronas and a lot of and other companies. Example with Shell, ExxonMobil, companies in Japan, and we're looking to sign more in the coming few months. So that is in collaboration because we believe that in order for CCS to be successful, we can't do it alone. We need to partner and leverage on other organizations, other service companies to make it happen. And if you see at the road, if you see what I have on the screen here, is basically a roadmap for Petronas in terms of our CCS journey. And as of right now, we have 2 confirmed CCS projects in Malaysia. The first one will be Kasawari, which will start up in Q4 2025. And once it starts up, it will be among the biggest CCS site offshore in the world. And our second CCS project is Lang Lebah CCS, which will start up about 2 years later in around 2027. Yep. And so in Petronas, we actually have, so I've been talking a lot more about, CCS as a tool or mechanism to help us monetize our high CO2 resources. So since we've seen that, Malaysia, we have a lot of storage sites available, what we've done is we've actually looked at the possibility or opportunity to create a new revenue stream for Petronas by offering storage sites for others. Yeah, and so also hence our second focus is actually in terms of CO2 storage as a new revenue stream for Petronas or Malaysia. Yeah, and with that we've started expanding our studies to include a lot more storage sites. So far, we have identified about at least 6 possible clusters, storage clusters in Malaysia. A lot of it is around the Sarawak area and some in the Peninsular Malaysia area. So those are the kind of things that we're currently doing within Petronas in Malaysia. And some of our operators are also working to mature their CCS projects as well, although nothing is firm as of right now. So essentially, we hope that by around 2029, 2030, that we'll be able to establish Malaysia as the regional sequestration hub for at least in around Southeast Asia. Thank you. Oh, back to you, Yati.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Mohamad. Once again, a lot of ambition, a lot of very positive development going on under the leadership of Petronas alongside BP. So it's really very encouraging to hear. So thank you very much for those words of wisdom. I should hand over now to Dr. Sule, who is a senior lecturer at the Bandung Institute of Technology, to share his views. Dr. Sule?
We realize also that the cooperation with industries and international partners are very important in order to speed up the implementation of CCS and CCUS in Indonesia. Several studies are still ongoing. For example, the study in East Kalimantan and Central Sulawesi related to the utilization of CO2 from ammonia plant. And Damian already mentioned about the past study related to the Tangguh CCUS project in West Papua. And then we work together with Pertamina in the study of the decarbonisation for greenhouse gas emission reduction program. In the future, we will work together with our potential partners such as Repsol for managing or for giving the good scenario for CO2 injection from the Sakakemang field, and also with impacts in the Abadi field. And then currently we are still developing the CO2 sourcing map and special database. Next slide, please. Okay, this is my last presentation. Already mentioned also by Damian that we already finalized the draft of the CCS and CCUS implementation regulation framework. This will be the level of the ministerial regulation, and our role is the coordination for development of this regulation. And the member for development of this one is academician, like from us, IPB, and also from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, oil and gas companies, Sakakemang, Indonesian Petroleum Association, and many others. And the aspect that are regulated is from the subsurface until the social aspect, and don't forget also the economic benefit is also written in this regulation. Okay, that's all from my side. Thank you very much for your information.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Dr. Sule. Clearly, collaborative research, working with private sector and government also is very important in advancing CCS. So the role that your institute is playing in that space in Southeast Asia is most welcome and very important. Thank you for those comments. And I'd like to pass now to our last speaker for the session before we have a bit of a discussion, and that is Noura Al-Amer, who is the Senior International Climate Change Policy Advisor here at the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute. So over to you, Noura.
Thank you, Alex. And I'm really happy to be here today with everyone. I just want to say this is actually my first month with Global CCS and my first presentation, so it's really exciting. So today I'm just going to take you through the Asia Pacific region, just a brief snapshot, and then talk about the IPCC report, and kind of turn a little bit to APAC and its relevance to the region. So next slide, please. So this is from the Global Status Report. So this was released in November of 2021. So undoubtedly now there are developments, but I think it's worth just giving an overview of the region. So 5 new facilities in APAC were added to the database. And what's really exciting was for the first time, there were projects in Malaysia and Indonesia. So inaugural commercial CCS projects. And in China, there was the launch of the emission trading scheme covering more than 2,000 power plants. And CCS is also included in China's 5-year plan for the first time. In Australia, they've included CCS in its emission reduction fund and allocated 300 million in funding for CCS projects and networks. And in Japan, Japan is pursuing blue hydrogen opportunities and driving transnational cooperation in CCS. So that gives you just a brief overview of what's going on. And I'm sure more exciting things will be happening this year, which will reflect in the next Global Status Report. So next slide, please. So for the IPCC, so the IPCC Working Group 3 report was published on April the 4th in an approval process that involves 195 member governments. The IPCC, which I'm sure most of you all know, aims to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change every 6 to 7 years. So Working Group 3 is the last installment of the current reporting cycle, and we're on the 6th reporting cycle so far. And it looks at mitigation of climate change, which is the most relevant to CCS technologies. So what it found was one of the key takeaways were that CCS is an option to reduce emissions from large-scale fossil-based energy and industry resources. And that really goes with the narrative that we've been seeing with the IPCC over the years, including through the special report of 1.5 from 2008 and even before that. In terms of geological storage, so geological storage is technically available through 2100 to limit warming to 1.5 degrees. So this kind of means that the capacity that they found exceeds CO2 storage requirements, but there will be regional availability, which could be a limiting factor. When we talk about the global rates of CCS deployment, these are what the IPCC found was it's far below those in modeled pathways to limit warming to 1.5 to 2 degrees. This is because CCS implementation currently faces technological, economic, institutional, and ecological, environmental, and socio-cultural barriers. And this really could be solved. I mean, policy is kind of being talked about by the speakers before me. It could be solved by, and addressed through policy instruments, greater public support, and technological innovations, which could reduce barriers to CCS deployment. And these are all things that the IPCC found, which I think is really interesting for the future of CCS. So next slide, please. So the IPCC also looked at CCS and the Sustainable Development Goals. So CCS is identified to play a key role in the transition of industry to net zero and will therefore broader environmental goals. So if we can we'll just go through this together and just look at what they found. So for SDG 3, good health and well-being, they found there to be synergies and trade-offs. For clean water and sanitation, there was found to be trade-offs. For SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, there are synergies and trade-offs. For SDG 8, there was found to be synergies. SDG 9, there are synergies. SDG 12, responsible consumption and production, there are also synergies. And life on land is the only SDG along with clean water and sanitation that has trade-offs. So I think this is really interesting for the industry in general to see the opportunities, things that the CCS industry can leverage, and things that the industry needs to work on. So next slide, please. So from a research perspective, the IPCC found that CCS is present in many accelerated mitigation scenarios. So I think it might be most useful to jump to the APAC region. So for Japan, for example, CCS and increased bioenergy adoption, plus waste to energy and hydrogen reforming from fossil fuels, so blue hydrogen, are all considered necessary in the power sector. That's what the some of the studies found. And in China, we can see that it has been found that CCS is necessary for remaining coal and natural gas generation in 2050 under 1.5 and 2 degree compatible pathways. So what this really shows us how much tailoring is needed on a country and regional basis to scale and deploy CCS. So thank you for listening, and yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Dora, and well done on your first webinar for the Global CCS Institute. Well, look, thanks. Excellent contribution from our four speakers. We now have some time to have a bit of a discussion, so perhaps if we could ask all of the speakers to turn their cameras on so we can all see each other, that would be great. Goodness me, where do you start? There's so much material here to draw on, so many issues to explore. I guess why don't we start with the role that CCS can play in deep decarbonisation. Yati, what's your view, generally speaking, of the need for and the role of carbon capture and storage in Malaysia and Indonesia specifically, meeting their climate mitigation ambitions?
Thank you for the question, Alex. So currently for Petronas, in terms of our, we've announced our net zero carbon emission for 2050 last year, and in order to achieve that, there's a lot of levers, and some of it is improving our operational efficiency, going to renewables, and CCS is one of the very key ones. And currently, in terms of maturity, CCS, I think, is one of the most matured within Petronas. We've already identified projects, we're ready to FID projects on it. Yeah, so it is very, very important, especially in the upstream of Petronas. It is very important as a tool for decarbonization. Yeah, on a larger scale within Malaysia, some industries, some companies are doing, solar energy, and they're considering direct air capture. But I think those would be on a smaller scale when it comes to, emissions reduction. I think as of right now, I believe that CCS is, is very key in terms of large scale emissions reduction.
Thank you for that. So one thing I noted, both yourself and Damien from BP spoke about the opportunities for CCS hubs in Indonesia and Malaysia. And we, the Institute, obviously also agree that CCS hubs and networks are key to large-scale deployment because it brings down costs and creates a business synergies that reduces risk quite significantly. Of course, these hubs and networks require significant CO2 transport infrastructure, pipelines, ships, etc. Damien, I might throw this question to you. Where do you think that is heading? Where, what's the state of development of CO2 transport infrastructure that will be required ultimately to enable investment in these hubs? And what do you think should be done to try and assist in the development and investment in that infrastructure?
I think if we look at the CO2 capture and storage, there's three links to the chain. There's the capture, there's the transportation, and there's the storage. I think particularly when you're talking about reservoir CO2, the capture is relatively straightforward. When you look at recapturing CO2 from the atmosphere and those sorts of things, that's quite a challenging exercise. But in terms of transportation and it is an area that does require focus and technology development to get it to be cost effective. We think that the early signals are that transportation of CO2 can be quite cost effective, and so we see that as something that's quite promising. I think for our Indonesia project, the Tangguh CCUS, the beauty of that project is that it's actually underpinned, and it's about finding that sort of, I guess, that critical mass to enable the massive investment that's required for CCS. it's underpinned by an existing asset and the need to really decarbonise the Tangguh facility, the Tangguh operation. And that was really important from a BP perspective for that to remain as a resilient hydrocarbon producing asset in our portfolio. We needed to address this CO2 issue. And so having that as I guess the objective of the CCS, then the conversation about third-party storage is really an add-on to that base business. And I think when you talk about pure CCS hubs, where you are purely talking about setting up a CCS facility in the hope that you will attract third parties to bring their CO2 without having that sort of base demand coming into the facility, that's a little more challenging because you've essentially got to go out there and capture that third party gas to really build the viability of the project from the ground up. So the Tangguh project is fortunate that it has got that base load capacity. That's not to say that we're not doing hub activity and exploring hub opportunities elsewhere as well. But it does get more challenging because we need to see, and this is like all low carbon energy, right? Is we need technology enhancements to occur, and it's very challenging to predict what they might look like and what the gradient is of those technology enhancements, which are going to drive down the costs of all of our energy solutions. And so it's a challenge.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. And clearly, there's a very strong role here for policy and regulation to assist in the deployment of CCS. You know, the renewable industry has shown us the way of how deployment leads to rapid cost reduction by the creation of markets and rewarding of investments in that particular technology. As a consequence, renewable energy is cheaper than it's ever been before and will continue to get cheaper. We can hope that the same sort of trajectory will also occur in CCS. And I think the evidence to date is that we're on that trajectory, but there's still a long way to go. But I'd like to come back to sort of the policy regulatory piece just now, because I think that is so critical. And you mentioned, Damien, the importance of policy and regulation. I'd like to ask Dr. Sule a question actually about this. So Dr. Sule, you've been involved with the coordination, I think you said, of the development of Indonesian regulation. I wonder if you could share with us, you know, one or two key issues or critical observations that you made in that process around the whole issue of regulation of carbon capture and storage.
Okay, maybe the most challenging task for us is how to develop regulation which could promote CCS and CCUS in Indonesia. It means that the economic benefits should be part also in this regulation. So that's why during the development we ask not only technical people but also the people who are very capable in the business things and also lawyer. Yeah, so that's why we work together in every meeting. It was attended by sometimes up to 80 people. Yeah, so we accommodate the idea from every member, and then we conduct the regular meeting at least once a week. So this is very good. We started our work in August last year and could be finalized by the end of February. Yeah,
that's a pretty rapid timeline, actually. And you know, your intervention then just reminded me of the importance of consultation and the importance ultimately of community support. Now, yeah. I guess the regulation that Indonesia has drafted includes, of course, a statement around or a discussion of the economic benefit, which is critical here, because at the end of the day, CCS needs to be profitable for those who are going to invest literally billions of dollars in this technology in the interest of reducing atmospheric CO2. So being able to monetize and be rewarded financially for doing all of the extra work required to capture and store your CO2 is critical. And there's an international policy aspect to this. I wouldn't mind just throwing now to Noura. Noura, what are your thoughts on the role of international policy in ensuring that the value proposition of CCS is properly recognised and that investments in CCS are able to monetize the climate value that those projects deliver. Can you talk to us briefly about, what might be entailed in that, Nora?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, I think one of the main things I think that needs to be done is that CCS needs to be understood more as a service. So what CCS does, it avoids emissions from happening in the first place. And unless there is a monetization or there's a value attached to that kind of, I don't know if we want to call it a service or that kind of action, then it will be, inherently we will have limitations in CCS deployment. So this is where policy can come in. There are already examples of this. So in the US, they've addressed this with tax credits and different benefits and incentives for CCS related industry. So this it can be solved, but it will be a policy-driven. It will be a policy-driven kind of action, I think.
Absolutely, I think you're right there. But we are seeing examples now where the policy environment really doesn't offer a lot of financial support, yet projects are still proceeding, which is extremely encouraging. So for example, Dr. Mohamad, you're going to have projects operating, I think from memory, by 2025, 2026. Your first offshore storage, I think you said, was starting in 2025, and then your second project was going to commence operation in 2027, all in Malaysia. I'm not aware that Malaysia has very strong financial support for CCS. Perhaps I'm mistaken there, but can you talk to us briefly about, the business case? What's enabled Petronas to make this investment and proceed with these very exciting projects?
You're right, Alex. There's actually no funding or financing for our first two CCS projects at all. Yeah? So the project is being undertaken under the PSC, Production Sharing Contract. So it's cost recovered through the Production Sharing Contract, in which the operators are compensated through a higher gas price. So what drives them is actually, it is actually still profitable. So it's really about, the need to come up with a technical solution to monetize high CO2 resources, and at the same time being, a responsible, operator by not having any emissions. Yeah? Because for Petronas, we've given a steer that by 2025 there is no continuous venting, and by 2030 there is no more flaring from any of our operations in Malaysia.
Thank you. And Damien, the same question to you about what's enabled BP to get over the line and make a positive FID decision on its project in Indonesia.
So I think you saw me stumble through the acronym for our project in Tangguh. It's called EGR CCUS, which is a long acronym. The EGR stands for Enhanced Gas Recovery. So that's part of the business case, is that we do have some enhanced gas recovery. We do, through the POD approval process, that was a key step in terms of the cost recovery process and validating it as a cost recoverable investment. But that's not to say, though, that BP come to this conversation and the pursuit of CCUS is very much to align a key asset in our portfolio, which is the Tangguh facility in Indonesia. We're looking to make that, to transform that into a resilient hydrocarbon producing facility. And to do that, we have to address CO2. And so there's a really strong, strategic drive to address that CO2 blemish, frankly, on the project. And so to some extent, I would say that we are putting a lower investment threshold on CCUS because of the strategic importance of achieving a resilient hydrocarbons from the Tangguh project.
Thanks for that. That's really interesting and insightful, actually, because we're seeing generally the sort of non-financial drivers starting to play a greater role in decision-making around capital allocation towards lower carbon investments, including carbon capture and storage. ESG drivers, for example, can go a significant way, but at the end of the day, of course, investments need to provide some sort of return or not cost too much, because companies have shareholders that need to be satisfied, of course. So thanks for that. I'd like to move on to something slightly different now. And Nora, I think you raised yes, you did. You raised the Sustainable Development Goals and the assessment that had been done recently that sort of mapped where CCS was supportive of the achievement of Sustainable Development Goals and where there are some trade-offs that result from the use of carbon capture and storage. Could you just unpack that a little bit for us? What exactly are some of those positive benefit synergies, and what are some of those trade-offs, and what are your thoughts on the topic more generally?
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, so for me, when I saw the Sustainable Development Goals in the Working Group 3 report, I thought that was actually a really great way to kind of link CCS into the global kind of conversation and kind of the global way of kind of doing things. And it's really important that we all understand the kind of inclusive and whole picture of anything that we do, even beyond CCS. So it was really refreshing actually to see that. And actually, I think it's something that we can explore more together as we go on. I actually was looking up the indicators before this meeting just so I can kind of understand more of how they kind of what indicators are associated to each. So, I'll just focus on actually the synergies because it's really obvious when you look at it. So affordable and clean energy has a synergy and a trade-off, which is understandable. And I think a lot of these, indicators at the moment could evolve once we, further move in terms of policy, in terms of financial instruments. I think we can really kind of really move on with these things. And I really want us kind of to understand that I don't feel like these are static. I feel like these are kind of ever moving. And I think even with the trade-offs, it's something that we can kind of look at as opportunities. For example, SDG 15, life on land, is totally understandable. So if you're looking at, just general biodiversity or environmental pollution aspects of these kind of industries. So, when we kind of transition and include CCS, I think could be beneficial to really bring the technology along with other sustainable and conscious kind of action that can help the industry in general. And I think we're already moving towards that, but if we kind of more consciously kind of include it, it could really, I think, one, help the CCS industry in terms of public perception, but also help the, generally heavy industry in terms of public support and even, I think it would really kind of set, be a more realistic approach to kind of 2050 and beyond.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's a timely reminder that global society is trying to do a lot more than deal with climate change. As important as climate change is, there are a whole range of other challenges that we are struggling with. And CCS is just one of the options that we have that we can deploy to help us solve all of these issues. One of which being, of course, climate change emissions mitigation. So. You mentioned, Nora, that one of the findings of the IPCC Working Group 3 was that deployment of CCS is way below what's required in order for us to achieve our climate objectives. And of course, that's, I think, obvious to anyone who follows climate at all. So I think I'd like to ask Dr. Sule, for your views and advice, Dr. Sule, on, from a sort of a researcher perspective, what do you think are the most important initiatives or actions that need to be taken in order to try and accelerate the deployment of carbon capture and storage so that we're able to meet our climate mitigation ambitions? Dr. Sule?
Okay, thank you, Alex, for the question. Yes, basically, maybe we have to work together, not only from different disciplines, but also between institution and also international network. This is the key point how to grab the CCS and CCUS technology. Yeah, and then I believe also that we have to think how this could be implemented in our own country. Yeah, you know that in Indonesia there is no incentive for the CCS and CCUS in terms of cash support. Yeah, but when we develop our regulation draft, there is an idea how about if CCS is supported also by the government, but it will influence to the smaller income for the country, but the revenue for the operator remain the same. So this is the concept we propose to government, and it seems it is acceptable. So something like that appear when we work together. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so I think it's time now to turn to some questions that we've received from the audience, and there's quite a few here already. So let me just pick one. So another one for you, Dr. Sule. What is the timeline for the sort of implementation of regulation of CCS in Indonesia? That was a little bit unclear to me. Is that regulation in place yet, or does it still need to pass your formal promulgation processes?
Yeah, in the past time, actually, we already got support from Asian Development Bank for preparing the very first draft of the regulation. It was in 2019, but then it was designed for the presidential decree. Yeah, after we talked many times with the government, it seems that the level of our regulation should be in the ministerial decree. So that's why this is the opportunity for us to revise the draft from the very first draft and include also several new aspects such as the monetization of the CO2. Yeah, and then it could be conducted from August until February 2022. Yeah, and now and then we made also something like a socialization to the international community, to the European cluster, to Japanese cluster, Canada and USA cluster, and also Australia and Korea. And then after we got new input from our international partner, we did revision, and then we submitted to the government. Now it is on the hand of the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources for the synchronization and harmonization, and they promised to be finalized by July this year.
Okay,
so
very comprehensive answer.
Yeah, very quick program.
Very quick. Yeah, very quick. Thank you. Okay, question here for Yati, Dr. Mohamad. What size of hub would you expect in Malaysia and Indonesia by 2030? You know, is it 2 million tons per annum? Is it 5 million tons per annum? Is it 10? And how do you think it might grow between 2030 and 2040? What's your vision here and expectation?
Okay, so our first CCS site, Kasawari, will be able to store about 4.5 million ton per annum. So that's the first one. And the second one, I think, is a bit smaller, about 2 million ton per annum. Yeah. In terms of our target clusters in the future, actually, I don't think we've really nailed down on the size. It's still at a very high level study stage.
Okay, thank you for that. Damien, question for you. Do you or does BP have any plans for the utilization of captured carbon dioxide to convert it into, building materials, aggregates, or chemicals, other things, other than just storing it or using it for EGR, of course?
I think the answer to that is no. Certainly not at a scale level. I guess this is we're carefully monitoring opportunities for responsible use and storage of CO2. But in terms of, is there something on the drawing board now? The answer to that would be no.
Okay.
Our solution that we see is right now in front of us, and this is leveraging, you know, the kind of activity that we've been doing for the last 100 years, is injecting it into reservoirs that we're well familiar with. As we've kind of been discussing, the key challenge here is how do you remunerate that activity, and that's a key challenge which is going to be driven by policy, which is kind of circling around what we've been talking about here today.
Follow-up question for you. So at the moment, there's a skill shortage in Australia across pretty much every industry for all sorts of reasons. Is there a similar skill shortage in Indonesia, Malaysia, with respect to the skills necessary to design, build, own, operate CCS facilities? Is that a significant barrier to CCS deployment? At least in your business?
I don't see it as a significant barrier for us. So BP have moved, as I guess it's one of the benefits of being a global organization, is that we, and by adopting agile ways of working through our organization, we're able to set up very geographically diverse squads to work through issues. And it's the kind of activity around CCUS where it really sort of draws upon those sorts of structures and those tools that we have within our organization across the globe. And so, yes, I think it would be challenging if the resources needed to be geographically located in Indonesia and that expertise needed to be physically in Indonesia. But we're able to draw across we call it the bigger brain in BP. We're able to draw across that bigger brain through some of the ways that we work.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so we are coming up on the end of the session at the end of the hour. So I think what I'd like to do, just to wrap things up, is to give each of our speakers 30 seconds each to make some closing remarks. So this might be an observation, this might be what's at the top of your wish list in terms of activity to assist in the deployment of CCS. It's whatever you'd like to say for the last 30 seconds on CCS. So why don't we start with Damien? You're the biggest person on my screen at the moment, so why don't we just continue with 30 seconds.
I need to sit further back from my camera. Look, I think from a CCS perspective, we're really excited about CCS at a global scale. It's something it's bridging what we've been good at for many years inside BP, and utilizing that expertise to deliver cleaner energy to our end users. And so that's why we're so excited about it. I think it has challenges, but all emerging clean energy has challenges. And so at least we're coming from a technical basis in terms of the work that we're doing and leveraging to develop CCS. And so, yes, we see it as playing a pivotal role in transforming some of our facilities into resilient hydrocarbon producing facilities. And I think the challenge for CCS, though, I think, is that it doesn't win the hearts and minds of the policymakers necessarily, because it's not jumping straight to the end game. And that's where everyone wants to be aspirational and they want to talk about zero carbon energy. We need to first address this and acknowledge that there is a role for hydrocarbons to play as part of the suite as we transform. Otherwise, we're going to be imposing extraordinary costs on energy.
Okay, thank you. Very, very sage words. Dr. Mohamad, would you like to share your thoughts?
For us, what we're focusing right now when it comes to CCS is actually on ways to reduce the cost. And so cost compression is very important for us to make CCS, to be able to encourage more CCS being deployed in Malaysia. And in that manner, there's a few things that we're working on. One is developing our in-house technology through our group research and technology. At the same time, we're also very big in terms of collaborating with others, those with other operators who have more experience in CCS. We're also collaborating with service providers and companies, with technology and with the willingness to help us to reduce our costs. So that's definitely our current focus when it comes to CCS, cost compression.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mohamad. Dr. Sule, some closing remarks.
Yes. of course, CCS and CCUS is predicted as a solution for our energy transition, especially if it is implemented in the oil and gas sector, or it is connected to oil and gas sector. But our homework is how about the CCS and CCUS that are connected to the power sector. So this will be our homework in the future. Especially Indonesia is a coal country, yeah, and most of the power generation is from the coal. So in the future, we want to use our natural resources, but it should be in the wise. It should be wise. So that's why maybe CCS and CCS is the solution to maintain the coal power plant. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nora, 30 seconds.
Okay, so thanks, Alex. So I think, we're in a growing world and we have growing energy needs. And I think we, definitely need a conscious and comprehensive technological approach that includes CCS, and that'll enable us to deliver the action required to strengthen the global response to climate change. And I would also say that it is quite urgent, and I think that was one of the main messages of the IPCC report. And if the industrial sector and if the oil and gas industry is able to act fast, I think that could help a lot with things like public support and perception. And I know there are barriers and financial barriers, but I really think that CCS really works at the heart of the issue, and it really stops emissions, kind of at the root of the problem. So I think there's huge opportunity here, and I'm excited to actually see the developments over the next few years. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We are very slightly over time. I apologise for that. It's been a great session, as always. On behalf of the Global Carbon Capture and Storage Institute, I'd like to thank all of our audience for being here. Of course, our wonderful speakers for sharing their time and their wisdom with us all this morning or this evening or this afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world. I'd like to note, of course, that our Emerging CCS Market Series will be an ongoing series every month through May, up until May. So please head to our website for more details, sign up and participate in some more interesting discussions to learn about CCS, its importance, its role, and how to accelerate its deployment. And with that, I'll bid everyone a good evening, good morning, good afternoon, and goodbye.